Right, in this lesson, we're going to be learning about CSS and how to create a tree view drop-down structure without any JavaScript. Now, I saw this original idea from Kate Morley. She posted this, and I've done something similar in the past, but a little bit different way. So I want to show you kind of the finished product and then how we're going to accomplish this with CSS. So it's what we call like a tree view, where you're able to sort of pull down each of these little items and you can kind of see how they behave there. We're going to be customizing the icons that go in front, along with the little legs here and the trees that actually navigate through these little sections. It's going to be all done with pure CSS using a fancy new HTML tag that you may not even be aware of exists. So follow along. Hope you learned something. All right, now this entire effect is going to be done with CSS. So we need to go ahead and come in here into our HTML file. You can see I've got an HTML and a CSS file. And right now they're both just empty. So I'm going to have image script. So DOC tab, I'm in Visual Studio Code. That gives me my boilerplate code. And then I'm just going to add an unordered list. So I'll say UL, and we're going to have maybe some list items. We'll have maybe 3 of those. So we'll say times 3, and sure. So let's go ahead and just add some text in here. I'll just say this is the first item and the second item. And then another one here. Let's go ahead and save that and make sure that's going to be showing up over here in our browser preview. So Command B, I've got the live server extension installed. So I'm going to hit live server, make sure that's updating over here. And then we're ready to go. So you can see over here, I'm going to zoom in just a teeny tiny bit so we can see our list item up there nice and large. So the first thing I need to do is link up to my style sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and add a link tag up here. And we'll say rel is style sheet. And we're going to have the href, I called mine style.css. Okay, so let's go ahead and come over here to our style sheet, and let's just add a quick rule for our body tag. I always like to do this just to make sure I have the two properly linked. We're just going to change the background color to red, and you'll see sure enough that updates to red, so we are now good to go. So back here to the CSS, or rather the HTML. Now, what we want to do is we want to essentially have a nested list, so a list inside of a list. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to grab this entire list and copy it, and then I'm going to paste that inside this first item. So in fact, let's actually, let's grab, well, sure, we'll just paste inside the first item. So we're going to hit return a few times and paste an entire new list inside of that first list. And you can see that's then going to give us that first level of abstraction. And we'll go ahead and do one more, maybe in the, sure, let's maybe do it in this second list item here. So we're going to have a couple of tiers here. So we'll paste one more tier there. So we've got sort of the first tier, second tier, and then this would be like our third tier. So I'll just type in third tier here. And so that's looking fine there. And yeah, that's kind of our structure, right? Where we have each of our tiers. Now, let's go ahead and copy this entire list. So I'm going to copy all of this code, the entire, well, not the entire UL, but rather let's copy all the first item like so. And let's paste it maybe inside of, well, I guess we'll copy all the inner list, sorry. Let's paste it inside of, let's actually delete the second one. We'll just paste it right here. Okay. So we're going to have sort of 2 main lists like so. So we'll call this one second item. All right, so we have our first item, and then we have this sub, and this sub item, of course, has another set here. Then we have this guy there, and that's kind of how that's all working. Now, one interesting thing here, I'm actually not sure what's going on. I'll have to troubleshoot, is I'm not sure why this third tier is actually indented all the way over. It should be listed right here with these as sub items. This actually maybe is a bug in something I typed in here. And sure enough, I just typed this in the wrong spot. So let me cut that out. That should be right up here above the list item. Probably got that issue down here since I copy and pasted that, and we'll paste that one up there. Okay, now that's looking proper. So you can see we have our first tier, which are these 2 bullets. We have our second tier, which are these 6 bullets. And then the third tier are the inner 6 bullets. And the nice thing about CSS is as you add more tiers, you automatically get different icons here for the bullet styles, which is kind of nice. Of course, we're going to be overriding all that completely. Now, this is just a little default list here, and there's nothing wrong with this, but there's no interactivity, right? I can't click on these things. I can't hide and show these elements. but there is actually an HTML tag that will auto hide and show elements based on a click state. So I'm going to demo that next. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now I'm going to turn off the big bright red color. That's a little bit intense there. And I'll just do this new tag below my list. So let's go ahead and just kind of collapse this guy down so it's out of there a little bit. Now the actual tag is called the details tag. And it looks like this. So you add a details, and then within the details you add what's known as a summary. And a summary sort of acts as the clickable title. So I'm just going to say clickable title here. And then right below this, I'm going to add a paragraph. And I'm just going to add some lorem ipsum text and go ahead and save. Now you can see what happens here is I have my clickable title. I have this little teeny tiny triangle. And as soon as I click that, it automatically reveals the contents inside of the details tag. And so it has its built-in click handler. I can click anywhere along the title to trigger that action. So what we're going to kind of do is we're going to combine this details summary and embed those inside of our list items so our list items can automatically click and expand as well. And then we're going to have to add some styling to make it a lot easier to see the levels of hierarchy and some custom buttons and whatnot as well. But this is the way it just behaves without any extra JavaScript at all. So let's go ahead and then incorporate this into our list. So let's kind of delete this here for a second. That was just to demonstrate how that tag works. And let's fly back open our unordered list. And now we can go ahead and start to incorporate this details tag. So we have our first list item. This is the actual text that I want to be clickable, right? This little first item right there. I can click that and should be able to fly out that submenu. So in order to do that, if you recall that with that details tag, I've got to go ahead and add the details tag right here. So I'm going to say the details. And then I'll just open and close that for a second. And the summary is actually going to be this first item text here. So I'm going to cut that out and paste it right inside of there. And then all of this text, the entire unordered list, which is the nested list, is just going to pop right down inside of that details tag. So let's go ahead and update this second one as well. So it's going to be a similar process here. I'm going to kind of do this manually. So I'm going to add the details tag here, and I'll just put that down on a new line. And then inside here again is going to be our summary. And the summary text is going to be this second item. So I'll cut that out of there, paste it inside of there. And then just like before, I'll cut this entire list out of here all the way down to, I'm getting myself confused because my code is not indented properly. I think it's all the way to right there. And we'll paste that in there. And that's looking great. Let's go ahead and auto format this so I don't run into any problems in the future. Okay, so we have all the code formatted and it's all looking fine. And you can see our list works just how we want. We've got these sort of 3 tiers happening with these detail tags. So the next step is going to be doing all the CSS to remove the default styles and then adding in some of our own components so we can get some lines, some markers, and some fancy things like that. So let's move over here to our CSS sheet. And right now we don't have anything in place. So let's go ahead and add a root element. We're going to be using the root element to add some CSS variables so that we can go ahead and make this a little bit easier on ourselves for calculating padding and whatnot. And then let's start off with removing the default styles. So we're going to say UL, and we're going to say list style, and we're just going to set that to none. And this will remove the default bullets on all of those lists, and that looks great. And now let's go ahead and also remove the default triangles on this little guy, so those are gone as well. And we're going to do this with our hook. So inside of our index.html, I've added the class of tree again to our main unordered list, and we're going to use that to style all these various elements. So that thing has really our only CSS class we'll add. We'll do the rest with just kind of descendant selectors. So I'm going to come in here and say .tree, and I'm going to say tree summary. So any child element that has a summary that's inside of a class of tree, we're going to say we're actually going to turn the cursor first. We're going to say cursor to pointer. And what this does is when we hover the element, it's going to let us know that we actually have the hand so we can click on these individual elements. So we'll do that. And then let's go ahead and hide these little teeny tiny boxes. Now these are hidden away inside of a marker pseudo element. So we have to say tree and then summary and then 2 colons. And then you can see down here, there it is. It's clear down at the bottom of this list, but it's called the marker. So this is going to affect the marker pseudo element, and I'll just set this to display none as well. And save. Now you can see that nothing happens here. When you do this, this actually depends on the browser you're using. And the reason is because I actually have to do a browser prefix on this. It's not completely supported in every single browser. So I'm going to copy this rule and paste it down here. And for this browser marker, I have to do the WebKit. It's called, in WebKit, the old name for this when it was previewed is called WebKit, dash WebKit, and I'm looking at my notes here, it's called the details marker. So that's the old name that works in WebKit browsers. You can see as soon as I save, sure enough, those goes away. But the new name is just simply marker. Okay, so now the default elements are gone, but you can see they actually still work, right? Even though the markers are gone, I can still toggle all these elements just how we would expect. Okay, so next we need to get in some lines so we can see that natural hierarchy of first column, second column, third column. That's what tree views really shine at, is showing you that data. So let's go ahead and start to add back in some of those details that are difficult. Now, as we're going here, every single time I save my page, if I make a change over here and save right in the live server, this file will update and then it collapses back down to nothing. So there's actually an HTML property we can add on these details. So if you just add the property of open, notice that that stays open. So I'm going to add this property on each one of my details tags just while we're designing this here, because it's going to make it a lot easier. There's one more right there. It's going to make it a lot easier if they're all open automatically so I can see those natural levels. So that looks great. So now let's come back here to our style sheet and let's begin the styling. Now we're going to be using pseudo elements here, and pseudo elements are not, none of this is really a novice thing to do in CSS, but I'll link to a card here or description if you want a tutorial on doing pseudo elements. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add we'll say dot, tree is our main unordered list, if you will. In fact, we're going to do this one as a main tag. So we're just going to say UL and then LI. And we're going to say position of relative. And the reason why we're doing position of relative on all of these is so that I can position the lines using pseudo elements absolutely. Now, I'm actually going to turn on some outlines or maybe even some borders. I'll just do outlines to start off. So I'm going to say 1 pixel solid black. Actually, maybe I'll do green so we can see it easier. And you can kind of see the natural outlines and hierarchies of every single one of these list items here. And this will help it make it a little bit easier for you to visualize as we're doing this. I'll turn these outlines off in a minute. Okay, next we're going to do a UL, LI, and for this one we're going to do the pseudo element. So it's going to be colon and then before. So with the before pseudo element, we're going to say position. We're going to position it absolutely, and then here's where we want to start to lay out where this is going to go. So for right now, all I'm going to do is say, let's just say left. I'm just guessing here, -10 pixels. And all I'm trying to do is just get a line to show up so that you can see that visually on yours. And I'll say top 0 pixels. I have an entire tutorial as well on CSS positioning. It's an excellent tutorial. I'll link to that up here as well so you can learn about CSS positioning. But let's see. Now I lost my train of thought. So we've got these. Okay. Now I want to go ahead and add a border. So I'm actually going to use borders, CSS borders, in order to add the little angles. So let's just add, to start off here, a border left. So border dash left. And we'll just say, I'm going to make it fairly large. So we're going to say 2 pixels solid, and let's just make it red. Okay. So let's go ahead and save that and see what we got going on here. And whoops, looks like I missed an absolute. So that was an issue. Let's fix that. Okay, so that's looking okay. Now, whenever we're doing pseudo elements, we have to have the content property. So I'm going to say content, and it's going to be set equal to nothing right now. So it's essentially going to be a blank content property. So that's fine. And then let's give this thing a width and a height. Because we're using CSS positioning, we have to have a width and a height on our element or it won't show up. So just to make sure something's happening here, let's say width of 20 pixels, and let's just say height of the same thing, height of 20 pixels, and save. Okay, now we can actually see these borders. So now you can kind of see how that's going to start to take shape, right? This is going to be the left border, and I'll eventually have these little lines that will go horizontally, but these are going to act as our vertical borders to offset like that. So that's looking pretty fine, nothing really too fancy there. Let's go ahead then and add the horizontal lines. And then we'll start to finesse things and add some CSS variables and do some calculations to make it work in more scenarios. Right now, we're just kind of hard coding pixel values in, right? But this is not going to be very ideal, especially if your font changes and things like that. So let's go ahead and add one more here. So we're going to add a border dash bottom, and it's going to be the same things, 2 pixels. Let's actually make it a different color so we can see these. Let's just do blue. Okay, so that's the border bottom, and I want this line to be up in the middle. So it's going to kind of come and cross right over inside of the words there. So we'll offset that here in a second, but that's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix the position. Now you notice that our horizontal lines are at the bottom of the text. So what we want to do is we want to make sure the height of that element, instead of having a hard-coded 20 pixels, we want to set that to 1em, which is just the height of the actual font, which should put it right at the bottom, and that's perfect. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to come clear up here to our main unordered list, and we're going to switch this out. Actually, I'm going to delete all these trees because it's kind of confusing myself. I was going to initially do these with CSS classes, but I'm just going to make these all unordered lists so it's easier for you to see there and not have to look at the HTML. Anyway, we're going to go back to the main unordered list, and we're going to set the line height to actually twice that height, so 2ems, and then save. And you can see what that does is it then sets up our little lines to be exactly in the center of each of those individual sub-items, right? Because the height there is set to 1em. Perfect. All right, now let's go ahead and set the width. So the width, 20 pixels is too much, so maybe we'll just set that to 10 pixels. And again, we're using hard-coded values here, but I think you get the idea. We'll convert these maybe at the very end to CSS variables. 8 pixels. Okay, that looks great like that. So that's looking okay like that, and perfect. So now the only other issue you can see we have is that our horizontal lines, they don't go all the way up. They sort of stop where that element exists, and our horizontal lines were done with this border left right here. So now we're going to add another pseudo element for the after, which is going to then sort of continue this down so it clicks into its sibling there if you want. So let's go ahead, let me scroll this up for you. So this is going to be a ul, li, colon, and then this is going to be the after pseudo element. And then it's going to be very similar. So I'm actually going to copy all this stuff in here and paste it all right there. We're not going to have a border bottom on this one. We're just going to have the left border. It's going to be the same value there. And instead of top 0, let's set it to bottom 0 and save. You can see now that finishes those off, right? So they sort of embed inside there like so. And that's now looking pretty good. We still obviously have to fix a few things, but that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to collapse these down. You can kind of see how that's looking there. And now I'm going to turn off the outline. Let's go ahead and turn off the outline on this and save so we can kind of see we're getting much closer. So we've got these little items, and now we just have a little bit of cleanup to do to sort of tag these things all together. All right, so let's come down here to this after rule, and I've just changed the color here to yellow. We're going to play around with this top and bottom position so we can get this yellow bar just how we want. Now, notice one thing. If I delete, I'm actually going to delete the border left out of this main one up here. So I'm going to delete the border left and save. So we're just left with our after selector that's handling the horizontal bar. And right now we have it set to a height of 1em. But if we set this instead to 100% and save, these are going to stretch all the way up their entire vertical height. So that's getting us pretty close to what we want. And then what we need to do is we need to add one more rule because I don't want these little after ones right here to be stuck with this. And so we're going to say ul, li, and then we're going to do the rule that's for the last child. So last dash child, this is the pseudo selector. Whoops. Sorry, not 2 colons there. That's for pseudo elements. There we go. Last child. Let me scroll this down so you can see that. A little easier. So the last child, I'm going to say display none. And then what that's going to make it do is, you'll see here in a second. And that definitely, oh, whoops, that broke it. I need to do the after. So the last child, and then we want to override the after element. So the after element, essentially, we don't want this to appear on the last child of every single element. So let's save that. Okay, perfect. So that's now behaving what we want. So to explain this rule right here, notice how the last child of every single list, so that guy and that guy, are going to be affected by this rule. And we're adding this CSS rule so that that border is non-existent on the last child. So now I'm going to copy this. I deleted that so you can see that now it's gone. And the reason why we have this border left on the before element, let's paste this back up here, is so that it fills in that little spot. So that's kind of the little fancy trick there, to fill in that little spot where we otherwise overwrote it. So now we're getting really close. You can see how good this is looking here. So instead of having these yellow colors, we're just about done. Let's go ahead and make these now just gray. So I'll make this one gray, and we'll say gray and gray and gray, just so they look a little bit better. There we go. So now that is looking really nice. Now we can also opt to write some CSS selectors. Maybe I don't want this to happen on the first element. So the very tree node, maybe I don't want any at all. I mean, I guess it's kind of up to you if you want that, right, that main element on the tree or not. But for sure, we don't want that little spot sticking up right there. So let's override that also with another pseudo element. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this rule here. It's going to be ul, and then this is going to be ul.tree. So only the unordered list that has the class of tree, which is, of course, for us, that's just our very main root one. And then the direct children of a list item. And if this child has an after pseudo element. So we're essentially going to set this to display none. Let's make sure this works. Perfect. So that gets rid of the little display none there. Now I'm going to do this as a group selector. So we're going to copy that, hit comma, and also override the before. So essentially the before and after pseudo elements, these little bars, are horizontal and vertical bars, we're making disappear on the main root list items. So let's go ahead and save that. And now those are gone. So now they're only going to be showing up here on our sub-tier items like so. Yeah, I think we have another one. I had another one somewhere. Oh no, already, that's it. Okay, perfect. So you can see we still get our cursor on the ones we can fly out. So now let's just make this one step further. We're going to add in some graphics over here with some little toggle icons so we can see when a node is selected or not. So we're going to essentially try to replicate those triangles, but maybe we'll do some sort of different symbol with some CSS to make that a little bit more visual pleasing. And then we'll be done. Okay, so now we're going to add another rule here. And this rule is actually going to be on the actual summary tags. So remember, the summary ones are the actual elements that house the text. And that's the element that before that element we want to add our little stickers to. So let's just come in here and I'll just say ul and then summary to make any child's summary of an unordered list have these properties. So let's go ahead and set this up. So we're going to say position of absolute, and sorry, I'm going to say summary before, because we're going to be doing this as a pseudo element. So position of absolute, make sure I spell that correctly. Absolute, there we go. And we'll say content. And for right now, we're going to leave content blank for just a second, but we're going to fix this in a minute. And then we're going to go ahead and add some background. So let's say background, and we'll just say, I don't know, orange for right now. Just to give ourselves a color here. We're going to set this thing to be display of block. And let's give it a width and a height. So after this, we should be able to see it pop up over there. So width, let's just say 20 pixels, and height is 20 pixels. Scroll down a little bit and save. Okay, so there's our little before elements you can see there. Now we're going to make them circles. So we're going to say border dash radius, and we're going to set that to 50 ems or something like that. Whoops. EM to make those things round instead of square. So that's looking okay. And now we just do the same thing, right? We're going to shift those guys over to the left. So let's say left negative 30 pixels. And now they pop over that way. And then we can say top. And this is essentially going to be, you know, 1. Right now we have our line height set to, do we have it set to 2 ems? We did, so I guess half of an em, right? We want to push that down to try to center those guys up. And yeah, so that's looking fine. Now we probably need I haven't actually done this yet, but our unordered list has default, I probably should have done this clear back at the very beginning, but we have some default padding and margins, right, which are affecting the placement of our list items. And we probably want to set those out to 0 and then just add our own padding and margin in. That way we could space this exactly how we want. But since I didn't do it at the beginning, I think you're getting the concept at this point. So let's go ahead and add in some pseudo elements here. So let's see. Let's fix up this spacing just for a second on these so we can get it just right. Whoops. So I'm just going to manually adjust this top to use pixels here. Whoops, that's too many. So we'll bring that down to 5. Actually, I probably want to mess around with the size. I think that's a little bit large for the size of these things. So let's take that down instead to 15 and 15 pixels for the size of those circles. That's a little bit better. And then I'll take this top, maybe 0.5 and we'll be close now. Yeah, that's pretty close. We'll call that good enough. Okay, now they're a little too far to the left, so we're going to take this maybe down to negative 0.5 ems. Not quite enough, so maybe yeah, I guess we need to take them at least a full character back, right? So that makes sense, a full M back. Maybe a hair bit more, 1.25 characters back. So you can see now we've got to try to make some guesses here, right? Do I want to shrink these up or push that out past that? Maybe we want to mess around with that a little bit. So I actually don't know if we can, I don't know if z-index will work here in this case to bring it up above. It does. So yeah, I could either shift that over to the left a little bit or leave it on top. I guess it's kind of up to you, however you want to handle that, but sure. We'll call that good enough. So now we're going to add in our pseudo content. So with the content right now we have blank, but we can actually add in that pseudo content. This is the entire purpose. Whenever I usually work with pseudo elements, I'm never using them how they were intended, but this actually is one use case where we're using them how they're intended. So we're going to add in the content with the plus symbol there, and that's going to add in our content here to the pseudo element. And now we just got to make sure we get this guy positioned up where he's supposed to be. So to make it so that it's in the center of this, we're going to use just a little trick with text align center, and that's going to get that centered. And then we're going to mess around with line height to pull this thing up. So we're going to say line height, and we'll set that to 1 em to start out. And you can see that's getting pretty close there. We're a little bit off, so we're going to have to do, I shouldn't use ems here. So I've got pixels and ems mixed around, but you get the idea. We'll just do 0.75 ems. I'm going to sit here and just fiddle with these numbers forever doing this, but you get the idea. Okay, so that's pretty close there. It looks like our centering's a little bit off because of our values we used up here with our ems, but that's fine. Okay, so now we've got these little guys that show up like so, and that's working great. And then now the last little thing we want to do is we want to write another CSS element that when our summaries, so if we go back to HTML, when the summary list, or rather the details tag, when the details tag is open, instead of showing a plus symbol, we're going to show a minus symbol so the user knows they can hit minus as well. So now finally, we're actually going to go delete all of these open tags that we added before, these little attributes, so that our list will now be closed by default. We'll come back to the CSS, and I'm going to copy this entire thing because we're going to borrow a bunch of it, and paste. And now we're going to set this to the after pseudo element. So that's all going to be the same, except the background is going to be a negative. Everything else should be the same, so I can delete all this. Essentially everything. Actually, this is not going to override, so I need all that. So let's test that out. Okay. So now we need to add in the CSS rule for when that is open. So when the details tag is where we're going to be adding this to. So let's go ahead and add that. Actually, we actually don't need any of this. We're going to actually just write a selector that only selects the open state. So we'll say UL and then space details. So any of the details, and we're going to select the open element. So this is an attribute selector, right, when we're using the brackets here. So whenever the details has an open status, then we're going to affect the child, which is the summary and the before pseudo element. I'll explain this here in a second. I'm going to say content and then set that content to minus symbol. Let's see if this actually works. So when we click that, nope, something's broken here. Oh, whoops, I misspelled summary. Let's save that and try it again. Okay, so they're plussed, and then I can click them, and that turns to minus, perfect. Click that, that turns to minus, perfect. And then I click these, and you can see that symbol changes there. So again, this is going to affect when the details is in the open state, look for the next child that's a summary, and override its before pseudo selector and change the content to minus. So essentially we're overriding this and changing this single property under the condition of the open state. That's a little bit, all of these CSS rules are a little bit advanced if you're starting out. But now we're just about there, right? We have our fully functional list with these guys popping in and out. So that's kind of fun. We can click anywhere along these things, toggle these states, and that is your fully featured tree view with pure CSS. Now, there's a lot of additional things you could do to this. We could add some animations. We could make these things rotate. We could add some fade animations to where these things actually animate down. We could play around with the animations and transitions on the actual pseudo elements with the before and after selectors and do all sorts of things to make this a little bit more interesting and interactive. But the fundamentals are all in this project now. I hope you've learned a tip or trick. I was going to go up and set up some root CSS variables to calculate automatically the width of things and do all sorts of things like that. But I'm not going to be building that in this. If you're interested, check out Kate Morley's tutorial. She has a few of those variables set up in hers. I did mine a slightly different way than she did as far as the selectors go. But yeah, that's pretty much everything you need in order to create a tree view in pure CSS. Like and subscribe. That helps the channel out. Comment down below. We're going to have a bunch of new CSS tutorials come out fairly consistently here in the near future, so stay tuned.